Hello and welcome back to a series of videos working effectively with Conformiq Creator, where we tell you kind of tips and tricks on how you can work effectively with the Conformiq Creator client. My name is Stefan Schulz and I'm the CTO and product owner of Conformiq Creator. So please understand that this video is not supposed to teach you how to model a given application, but rather to introduce to you features or kind of in the tool that you have not known about so far or that are not covered in by the training material necessarily that deeply. But anyway, we require that you have some kind of a basic understanding before you watch this video, so that you, for example, have watched all the working effectively with Conformiq Creator videos, or that you've attended and passed our online Conformiq Greenbelt training. So in this fourth part now, we will cover our first advanced topic, which is custom actions. So I hope you have a strong cup of coffee next to you or your best cup of tea. So what we will do is we will first kind of set the scene for custom actions and kind of introduce to you in which situations they may be required based on showing you some examples. And we also kind of shortly look at how importers create custom actions. That's maybe another way how you encounter them first as part of reverse engineering. And then we'll have a short discussion about what's good and what's dangerous about custom actions, why they are an advanced topic. Then we're going to go through a custom action definition, take you through all the details required, and finally finish up with some best practices, where we are also looking to what you should not really do and how it's easy to get things wrong. And of course, the most important thing is to always try to limit the amount of custom actions that you create in a team of people when you do models. So design for reuse. So let's get started. So to set the scene, let me show you actually something that you think is probably already well covered by Creator, which is, for example, web applications, right? So in a web application, I have lots of things in the GUI that I can interact with, and Conformiq helps me very well. But there's some things where maybe the default predefined actions are not enough. And one of these cases, for example, this browser bar, right? Even though it looks deceivingly like a text box, it's not a text box, but it is the browser bar. And basically, when you want to kind of express that you should navigate to a certain page, there's no predefined action that actually says that. So how do I model that, right? Similarly, in certain kinds of verifications or certain types of widgets are not by default supported. So one example could be that in dropdowns, the available options cannot be verified. You can only verify what is the selected option, but not what are all the available options. Or you want to check the text color is black or something like this. This is also something which by default is not supported in Creator, because we mainly focus on functional testing and not like the appearance of web pages. So this is one case. So where some UI features are maybe not supported. And another easy case is, for example, that I may have here, for example, a desktop window where I need to put in a command like directory or something. I need to run this as part of, I need to run the script as part of the test, and I need to see that it produces the correct output. How would I model that? Because there's no text boxes here, no screens, no nothing, right? It's purely on the command prompt reading output. So it's for these purposes that we have an extension point in the language called a custom action, where the user can really themselves define, what actually you want to model, and even give it its own symbols, etc. So this is in a nutshell what custom actions are about. The other way how you usually encounter them is, for example, in our reverse engineering, right? So we have, for example, manual tests that we're importing, right? So, and when we import these manual tests, all these steps have to be somehow converted into the modeling language. Now, when you look at it, it looks easy because this is all close to our GUI actions, but in principle, a manual tester can write whatever they want, right? And we need to import it. Right? So the safest way of importing this is to use a custom action. So I can just demonstrate that quickly for you when we do the import. And I select here the manual tests and configure the Excel file to read, and I read it in. And then what you will see is that the tool creates a model, an activity diagram, which is purely driven by custom actions, right? So you see that here. There's the activity diagram. Let me get that in modeling perspective. you see no GUI actions. Even though we're interacting with the GUI, well, we know it because we can read and we understand English, but the tool actually takes the safe route and says, let's construct a custom action. So we're basically the text here. When we say enter URL, it finds out, okay, this is the enter URL custom action, right? And it specifies the custom action for us and identifies the parameter. So all these custom actions are automatically created. And if you have followed our other tutorials, you understand, for example, that the next step now in this model is to kind of try to replace all these custom actions here with actions that are GUI actions, so that they can be automated. And this is actually one of the big problems we have with custom action when we go to test scripting. They require a lot more work, whereas GUI actions basically are immediately automatable. Custom actions all require a custom automation engineer's job to do. This is why, again, we're trying to minimize the amount of custom action and use as much predefined actions as possible. Right. So at the end of the day, of course, you can look at the drawback as a benefit. So custom actions enable you to almost, write and do anything you want and get that especially out to Excel when you're rendering into manual test descriptions. Okay. Okay, so anatomy of custom action. So this was about how manual test implementation creates actions, but let's say we want to create an action, right? So now we're going back to our example, which is, let me just close up this one and open simple web application. Now, you may know this is our standard example. And if you see, actually in the beginning, there's this weird message in this initialize activity where it says configuration message ESD. What that actually, what that means is that we should be entering this into a bar, but somebody has decided to use a message to model this. Now, the problem that I have is that when I look at this in my generated Excel test suite, this just looks like nothing like I would ever write, right? And it's sending a message to a config interface where the base URL is set to this. So it's clearly here that this is a bad choice to use the message type, but instead what we should do is we should be using a custom action. So here I have a model of a custom action for you. So basically, it's a good practice to isolate custom actions into their own thing. The custom action has a name. Please note this name will only appear in the model. It will not go out to the Excel tests. A common mistake people do is to name the action exactly what they want to see. It should say what it's supposed to be doing. So it's navigate to URL, right? Then we see it has a parameter, and this is useful to keep it reusable. So I don't just want to use this in one model where it's hard-coded to this one thing, because then I create one custom action per web page. But I want to give it a parameter so that I can easily reuse it, right? And this parameter, it should just have the address. So it should just be about the data, and it should not include a lot of text that needs to be parsed. It should be data only. So we see here's the name. Then there's the external interface. The external interface is required basically to group the action. So if you look here, you will see this group. Then all the custom actions are grouped. So try to use the technology that you're modeling with a custom action, for example, web, or that it's a browser. Make it so that you can easily find your custom actions in this view again, right? That's the main idea. Okay. So then let's go back to this definition. Then there's the short form. That's a requirement by the modeling language. As you can see, every action has the short form, these two letters. So basically also custom actions need to specify this. This is why you have to have two letters, and exactly two, with every action. And then we have the action type. So custom actions can only be input or verification. They cannot be both at the same time. So whenever you have a sequence of actions you want to model with a custom action which contain input and verification, you need to separate them. So click a button, check something is happening, and then enter something again are three different custom actions, because custom action can only be containing, let's say, the inputs. And then there's the textual rendering, and this is maybe the interesting part. This is the stuff that actually goes out to Excel. None of the other stuff does. And here you can actually, here we offer a simple editor that allows you to compose text fragments to, let's say, with the data that you have. So for example, here I can say navigate to URL, and let's say if I would want to add, let's say, the URL in double quotes, what I could do is I would add the double quote here, and I would say here also a double quote. So now I would say navigate to double quote URL. Okay, so now we have changed this. We can save our changes. Now let's use it. So using this, let's just start to replace this message and see what happens. So basically, I drop the custom action there. And then it's like any other input action where basically I have to specify the data, right? Where do I want to navigate to? So I say to this address, and I take this away. So now if I go back and redo the test generation, I will see that all my tests will change because now I've changed out one of my actions. And then I will get a new output where all of a sudden I will get much better output. So what we can see here is it's very easy to get exactly the text in the Excel that you want. But on the other hand, you need to spend time to get it right. This is the drawback. And you have to specify everything manually, because none of the predefined actions require you to do any text definitions. Okay, so now we have our test. Now we render them to Excel, and soon I can just open it. Okay, so we're done. And now let's look at our tests and now see, okay, just like we had imagined, navigate to this. So every test is using exactly the font that I wanted. So this is how you can do it now. If you have, for example, what you should not do is now start thinking, well, I like this, I can write whatever I want, so now I want to change my fill user info form because I don't like how Conformiq prints it. This is actually the wrong approach because you will create more custom actions. You should always use the GUI actions. And the rendering of GUI actions, in case you don't like this writing, we can change that in the scripter, so in the Excel scripter, that the text will be proper. But the wrong approach is to create a custom action to replace existing actions. Okay, that's just not correct. Okay, everything has been said and done. By the way, it's also just to show you some kind of more ways. There's, for example, a example project that you can take a look at. Which imports custom actions from Excel-based definitions. So this would be library functions. So in this example project, it actually produces an Excel file which shows you some example where, for example, I use an Excel file to just give the action name, the type of action, and this is here a more advanced form of specifying textual rendering, all the fields I want to have. And then what I can do with this is that I can just import it. Automation functions. Yes, and this is now actually, funnily enough, this is some models, some actions that actually model how I interact with desktop application. For example, there's this infamous command that I just showed you, which is enter text via the console, right? So enter console command, right? Remember how I showed you this DOS window? This is how you would actually model it. So you would say, okay, tell me on which machine IP address you want to run, what type of command, is it DOS or Unix, and what is the actual command, right? So, and then it basically prints out this text based here on this advanced textual rendering, and it will come all nice into the thing. So this way you can see we have an action for entering stuff, for verifying from the console, for running a select on a database, for modifying file data. So here you can see now, and actually even it has its own icon that you can also associate. You can read the manual how to do that. It makes it even look a little bit more prettier. So now you can basically create an activity diagram and start just, banging together this, this model that I've just been kind of talking about. I wanted to just go custom input action here. I want to run, for example, I want to run the IP config command, right? And this is on well, okay, here you could put the IP address in command type, and then again, if you would want to verify, then it would be a separate action where you would have to say, now here, this is what this program should print for me, and here you would describe the data that's to be produced on the server for the command type and the command and the expected data, right? Okay, so this gives you an idea how you can create custom actions and what you can do with them. One of them was to extend, let's say, the GUI domain, which we did in the simple web application by entering this navigate to a URL function. Here we see how we can even create a completely new domain, let's say desktop application support or backend testing support by using custom actions. Good thing is here is this import is creating structure diagram libraries. We also recommend that you do this, that in general you don't let everybody specify their own custom action, but you have a senior expert in a team create them and share them as a structure diagram library, and people request it from that well-trained person, right? Okay. Okay, let's wrap it up with some kind of pitfalls and best practices. So here I've been kind of trying to collect a little bit some of the things of actually that you should not be doing, just to show you how it's easy to get this also wrong. Right now it's, looks all very easy when I'm showing you these predefined samples, but actually in actuality this can be quite tough. So, and bad definitions are not always intended. They may just come for the lack of experience. So if I go back to my kind of example, let me say I have now created actually here 5 different ways how to produce navigate URL, right? So this navigate URL function that we've just modeled, right? This is the original that we did. There's actually 4 other ways of how I could done it. And the interesting part is, if I just render this, in the output, right, you will not see any difference. It will all look exactly the same. So we have multiple ways of how to model getting the same output, but there's only very few ways of what you should actually do to get them, right? So this is why we have this session here on the best practice, so you get the guidance as to how you should actually do it. Okay, so just to prove to you, test cases generated, all of them say navigate ESD. So you would almost think this is the same action, but these are actually all different definitions. Right? So let's review these definitions. So the first one, right? Now this is a common mistake that I've seen in the past. So basically people are not using the external interface correctly. They start writing the action there. They give that, but this should be a group or the interface that we're trying to model, so it should not have to do anything with the action. And then they just say something to a function, but look, when I say here navigate to URL, it can still spit out whatever I want, right? But this is a bad definition. So the external interface should define the interface. So let's say I got that right, I got browser. So then I could just say open Parabank application. But Parabank, that is actually just for one application, but actually I want to, even within an application, go to different pages, or I want to use the same action for opening different applications. So this is why this is not good. And even if you make it more concrete in the name, it does not actually matter here. And again, even if you say open Parabank, what will go to Excel is navigate, right? So then, even if we make it more specific, it still doesn't solve the problem. It's limited to Parabank only, right? And instead, what we want is we want to use a parameter, right? So this is why, we have here the parameter URL string. This way we can open any application. And then finally, another bad thing to use the parameter is to just say, oh, I can just cut my custom actions to very little by just having one generic input action, and I can write any text I want. But this is actually a really bad idea, because that shifts all the work to specify the details into this thing here, right? And even though this looks good for manual testers, for automation engineers, this is a nightmare. So we need to keep in mind that we're affecting not only the manual tests that are going on, but also automation tests. So the parameter should only be the data, and it should not contain just text or string that needs to be parsed, right? So yes, so this is an overview of like the common mistakes that you can make. Too specific, too general, right? And this is just bad. Okay. So this is one thing. Another thing that we, for example, encounter is that people start to remodel things either by accident, so meaning unconsciously, or sometimes consciously because they don't like the output. So let's say I don't like that it says fill out the form, etc. I want to say just enter the username and password. So I create this custom action. But this is actually a bad idea because I'm replicating the GUI action. Now, if I want to get an automated test for this, an automation engineer will have to implement this function for me. If I use the GUI forms and text boxes, they don't have to do this work. That's why I want you to use the GUI actions here for that. And yes. And again, if you don't like the text, the easy way to fix this is just to say, change the Excel scripter to produce nicer text, and we're done. Okay? Yes. And that basically concludes the parts on like some best practices. But I want to just ensure that you understand that custom action definition is not easy, even not for people like me who are experienced, because it may take multiple iterations, and you need to check the output before you can really say it's fine, right? So if, for example, we take this verify drop-down options, right? So let's just do a quick definition of this, right? So we create a custom action. We say verify drop-down options, okay? We got a good name. Then let's say, what should we parameter? Okay, so what is the field name? Okay. Then I can have the same field name on the screen at different places or on different screens. So let's add at least, let's add screen name to make sure that we can easily locate also with our automation code the field. And then, of course, what are the values, right? And here we actually hit an interesting limitation, because actually in creating custom actions, you can only have single strings, so you cannot have multiple strings. So if I want to check multiple options, I would have to somehow specify them in a comma-separated list. But that's, again, bad for the automation. So what I would recommend to you is that you actually change this, and you just actually create a function for single value in the options, in the drop-down options, right? Okay, so now we have this. Then we need to worry about everything else. Interface. We don't have a verification interface. So basically now we say, let's call it page verification. Okay, we have some extra page verification stuff. And then, for example, we need to pick this page verification, short form, verify dropdown, action type. Now we have verification, textual rendering. Okay, now we go. So verify the dropdown, and then we have the field name, and then space in the screen, and then space has the lists in the options, the value, right? So now we have, for example, a first version of this function that we would have to look at. And so if I want to verify, if I want to use this verification, okay, we have here an error. Let me just see. Input external interface. So okay, we have here a mistake that this should also say output because we're doing verification. This was my mistake. Okay, so now we have a function ready that we can then use. For example, in the navigate examples, I have now this new group here where I can then say, okay, I want to verify in the screen parabank account type is checking. Okay, so that checking. This gives you an example of how you could then use this action. But as you see with custom actions, not only do you have this problem of typos, but you need to specify a lot more information. Like if I would verify something with a GUI action, I don't need to specify field names and account types. But this is something, and screen names. This is something that in the custom actions which comes with it. So custom actions are powerful. You can basically extend the available actions easily with your own actions, but the trick is to get the specification right, and also a thing is about creating the correct custom action. Creating it in the correct way is a very important aspect. So whenever you create on your own, please make sure that after your first tries you get a review by an expert. Okay? And this basically brings me to the end of this session. I want to thank everybody for attention. This is a tough topic, so feel free to rewatch the video and make sure you follow the best practices in your custom action definition. Good luck.